use on our website. So there, I think I'm ready to go. And good day and welcome to the webinar, Essbase Excel Add-in Spreadsheet Reporting, as I just said. My name is Craig Messenbring, and I represent HCG, a company based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We provide consulting, training, and product sales in the business intelligence software arena, specializing in Hyperion Essbase, Oracle Hyperion Essbase. We do consulting and development. We're an Oracle certified partner. We are an Oracle approved education center with a center based out of Phoenix, Arizona. And we do product sales, licensing, and custom tailored applications. So the rules of engagement today are hopefully everybody is all muted. Questions, enter them via the chat tool that GoToMeeting provides here, or I might possibly open up the phone lines at the end. This webinar assumes that you already know how to connect to Essbase and that you've retrieved data into existing Essbase reports, but maybe you don't know how to create those reports yourself using the spreadsheet add-in. But before we get into creating these reports, let's make sure everybody knows what Essbase is. I try to keep things simple here. Essbase is a multi-dimensional database designed for reporting and analysis. But that brings up a couple of points. What's a dimension? Well, I like to think of a dimension as a description of a part of your business, like the products that you sell, the customers you sell to, the markets that you sell in, the measures that measure things like profit and cost of goods sold, and possibly a time dimension. And all of these dimensions are organized hierarchically so that you can get summarized views of the information, like the yearly information, or more detailed views of the information, like quarters, months, weeks, days, however you want to organize your dimensions. So as it says here, this allows you to view more or less detailed information as needed. And the fact that there are multiple dimensions, a multi-dimensional database, this allows for the easy and fast analysis and reporting of multiple facts rather than just 2 or 3 facts. And I'm making a presumption at this point that right now maybe you have reports that are given to you, created by someone else, and that you just go and retrieve into those reports, possibly changing something like the time member that you see here in cell A1 from quarter 1 to quarter 2, or from January to February, and then doing another retrieve and you're done with your reporting. Well, that's certainly creating data in an existing report, but it's not creating a report or analysis of your own. So you're using only a very small portion of the product if you're doing that at this time. So what you really want to do is to create this report on your own by pulling the data you specifically want and analyzing that data. Did we make the plan for the month? Which product was most profitable? And then if you want to go beyond that, which I'll demonstrate at the end of the webinar, you can do things like automate the reporting by adding buttons, checkboxes, etc. to your spreadsheets so that you can make selections from these buttons, checkbox, drop-down lists rather than having to manipulate the report via the Essbase tools. And all of these things are where the power of Essbase lies. And you get to those points, obviously, via training of some sort, and this webinar is the beginning of that training in these areas. And one more step before we get moving with actually creating reports is, well, in order to create a report, you have to know what you're looking at. So you have to know your database. And once again, Essbase is multidimensional. And each dimension describes a part of your business, and each dimension is arranged hierarchically. And so you need to know, what do I have for the dimensions? What are the hierarchies of the dimensions? You even really need to know what are the properties of the members within those dimensions, but that's another story for later. And the knowledge of your database comes through experience of working with the database, but it can be helped with a couple of very easy things that you can do. First, I'm going to switch over here to Excel in Book 1, and I've already connected to Essbase. I can tell that I've already connected to Essbase by going to the Essbase disconnect command. Notice I'm in Excel 2007, for those of you still on 2003, and I've gone to this add-ins ribbon, and with the within the add-ins ribbon, there is an Essbase menu, very similar to what it looked like in 2003. Just get to it from a different place. And when I press that disconnect command, I can see that Book 1, Sheet 1 is connected to my Essbase server to this database called Sample Basic, and I'll leave it at that. But right now I'm going to do a retrieve command, and everybody here has probably done a retrieve command before, but maybe not into an empty spreadsheet. And by retrieving it into an empty spreadsheet, you're essentially asking Essbase to give you information without providing Essbase with any information on what it is you want to see. And so Essbase makes assumptions, as we all do. So I'm going to do an Essbase retrieve. Essbase has made assumptions, and those assumptions are, you didn't tell me what to show you, so I will simply take the top level member in each dimension, the top level member in the hierarchy of each dimension, and display it on the spreadsheet. So my dimension number 1 happens to be year, dimension 2 measures, dimension 3 product, dimension 4 market, and dimension 5 scenario. So just by doing that, 1, I know how many dimensions I have, 5, and 2, I know what the top level member in each of those dimensions is. In this case, year measures product, market, and scenario. And it gives me a number which essentially represents the intersection of all of those top level members. So this number is telling me this is the total year number for my total measures for all of my products in all of my markets for all of my scenarios. Not very helpful at this point, so we probably need more detailed information. But wait just a minute before we go to more information. I'm going to go back here to the presentation here, and this is essentially what I did. Retrieved into an empty sheet. Now I know how many dimensions there are in the database and what they are, year, measures, product, market, and scenario. But there's another thing you can do to learn about your database. You can use a tool called member selection. So if I go back to my spreadsheet here, and I just have year selected, and I go into my Essbase menu and select this command called member selection. What you're going to see here is that in a drop-down list, I see all of the dimensions that were just retrieved for me, and I can select one at a time, any of them. I'll select a year here. And when I go down into the members area and I select a year, then all of a sudden this expand to descendants button gets activated, and if I press it, I can see what the entire dimension looks like on all of its hierarchy. In this case, for the year dimension, I have year followed by 4 quarters, followed by the 3 months in each quarter. Very simple dimension. But let's move over to measures instead. So I'll select measures from the drop-down list. I select measures in the members area. That makes the expand to descendants button active. I press that again, and that expands to the entire hierarchy. And I can see that underneath measures, I have 3 children called profit, inventory, and ratios. But underneath profit, I have 2 children called margin and total expenses. And underneath margin, I have sales and cost of goods sold. And underneath total expenses, I've got marketing, payroll, and miscellaneous. And I can go through all of the dimensions in the database and just select them and expand to descendants. Here I have 4 regions with states within those regions. If I go to product here, I've got 5 product groups. But when I expand to descendants, I see that I have different products within those product groups. Or if I select scenario here, all I see is that I do have just actual budget, variance, and variance percent. But that's another way of learning about what's in your database via this tool called member selection. Now, we're finally ready to start creating our reports using the core commands. The core commands, I believe, are retrieve, zoom in, zoom out, pivot, keep only, and remove only. We'll go through each one of those. I think it's obvious to everybody that if I zoom in on something, I select a year, I go to my Essbase menu and select zoom in, it zooms into the next level of the hierarchy. I can, via options, specify whether I want it to zoom to the next level, to the bottom level, or to all levels in the hierarchy, but usually I just go to the next level. And then I can zoom in on quarter one to see the months. And I can zoom in either by zooming in via the command or simply by double-clicking and then getting the months within those quarters. Now, whether I can double-click or not and get a zoom-in command done for me depends also upon options. And now if I right double-click, it zooms out for me. Okay, my mouse isn't working quite the way I want it to. And instead, I'll just zoom out here with the command. I can also zoom in on something like product here. But notice when I zoom in on product, which is up here in my columns area, it automatically gets transferred over to my rows area. So here are the numbers for my colas, and here are the numbers for my root beer, et cetera, et cetera. One of your questions might be, well, why, when I zoomed in on something that was in the columns, did it move over to the rows? And the answer is quite simple. Excel has a greater number of maximum rows, 60-some thousand, as opposed to the maximum number of columns, 255. Those numbers may have changed in 2007. I may be behind the times. But because there's more room in the rows area, it automatically pivots, takes it from the columns, and moves it over the rows. But then you might say, well, I really wanted it back up in the columns, and I already gave the command away. So if I select any one of my products, it doesn't matter. I'll select root beer here, and use my pivot command. That's going to take something that's in my rows and move it up to the columns. Or something that's in the columns, I'll select cream soda this time, and move it over to the rows. Here I'll select quarter two and pivot and move it up to the columns area. If I zoom in on something like market here, it will also zoom in, go over to the rows area. And once again, if I want it up in the columns area, I will pivot it up there. I'll pivot it back to the rows for a moment. And an interesting thing about the pivot command is, besides the pivoting I've been doing via the pivot command, I can also, and excuse me for a moment while I switch options here. That's why I couldn't right double click. I didn't have that enable secondary button option selected. Now I'm going to right click, hold it down, and I'm going to drag it up to the top so that my markets appear up in my columns. Or I can right click my quarters and year and move it down to the rows. And here's one thing that you can only do with right clicking, you can't do with the pivot command itself, and that is if you have multiple row dimensions. Here I have my quarters are then delineated by the products within those quarters. So I have multiple row dimensions, but I can take my quarters and move them to the inside of the products so that now I have the same data on the sheet, but I'm analyzing it differently. I'm analyzing my products by quarters instead of now my quarters by product. Or here, if I drag my products up to the top, now I'm analyzing my products by region. But if I drag my regions up above the products, now I'm analyzing my regions by products. Very simple right-clicking and dragging, once again, if you have your options set up correctly, like you saw me do. So we zoom in for more detailed information. Now I'll zoom out on quarter one by right double-clicking there, and it's back to the year. I can zoom in for more detailed information, zoom out, right double-click for more generalized information. There it goes. Zoom in again. Back to the presentation for a moment. Get to the right one here. There we are. So we've talked about retrieve, zooming in, zooming out, and pivoting. Zoom in for more information. There I zoomed in on products. Why did the products move from the columns to the rows? Because Excel has more room in the rows area. Pivoting is moving row dimensions up to the columns or column dimensions up to the rows, or transposing the order of multiple row or column dimensions. But that you can only do via right-clicking and dragging as opposed to using the pivot command. Zooming out, simple command, just less detailed, more generalized information. Now let's get to the keep and remove only commands. I'm going to go back to Excel for a moment, and I think I'll drag my products up here. And I've got a lot of information on this sheet. I have to scroll over and get to all the way over to column AE, and maybe I really don't want all of that information. Like, let's say I want my regions east, west, south, and central, but I don't want my total market. Well, I could go to column F and delete column F via Excel, but that would only delete column F. It wouldn't delete column K, which I also want to get rid of, or column P, etc., etc. So instead of doing that via Excel, it's much better to select the member or members you don't want to see and use the Essbase remove only command. And obviously keep only is the opposite of that. If I did a keep only right now, I would have only the market in my market dimension. But I'll do a remove only, and that got rid of column K and P and whatever other columns had market in it without me having to do Excel kinds of things. And it comes in particularly handy what if I wanted to get rid of COLAs? Well, if I happen to delete column C via Excel, I would not only be getting rid of COLAs, I'd be getting rid of West also. And I don't want to get rid of West. I want West to be in these other areas here. I just want to get rid of COLAs, so if I select it and do a remove only, West is still there for root beer, cream soda, etc., etc. And you can actually select multiple members from multiple dimensions. Here I'm selecting quarter 1, quarter 3, East, Central, root beer, fruit soda. I've selected 6 members from 3 different dimensions, and I'll do a keep only on those. And my result report has only quarter 1 and 3, only East and Central, only root beer and fruit soda. So I highly recommend that when you're initially creating your reports, you might get into a habit of doing something like this. And by the way, if your report doesn't turn out the way you want it, just select the upper left-hand corner here between A and 1 and delete everything you have on the screen, select one cell and do a retrieve, and start all over again. But when you start all over again, you might do things like zoom in on year, zoom in on measure, zoom in on product, zoom in on market, zoom in on scenario, and then pivot my market up to the top. Things like that where you've got way too much information that you really didn't want to see. That's where you can start doing things like I don't want ratios and measures. I don't want variance percent, and scenario. And from there, just do a remove only. And I've reduced the size of my report considerably, and I can go on my merry way and do things like I do want COLAs and root beer, and I do want East, West, and South, and do a keep only in that case. And once again, I've reduced the size of my report quite easily and handily. Sorry, wrong one. There we go. Back to keep and remove only. Don't use Excel to delete rows and columns. It will work in certain situations, but not in all of them. So I highly recommend the use of keep and remove only. So to recap what we've covered in this webinar, Essbase is a multidimensional database. If you want to do reporting on your database, you should know the dimensions, the members, and their hierarchy. And then use those core commands, retrieve, zoom in, zoom out, keep and remove only, and pivot to do probably 60% of your reporting, but there is quite a bit more to Essbase than that. So if you do want to find out more, we have 2 half-day spreadsheet reporting classes, core commands and concepts, advanced commands and concepts, or a full-day class. And when you take the full-day class, you learn things like 4 different methods of creating reports. So there's a mouse and menu method, which I've been using so far, member selection, there's a freestyle method, there's a query designer method. In member selection, that is a great tool for a number of things, and there's 4 ways you can use it. You saw me change an option, but there are many options. How should I use them? When should I use them? When shouldn't I use them? There are things called member aliases that you should know about. When I talked about understanding the database, you should really understand what is called the database outline, the dimensions within that outline, the members within those dimensions, and the properties of those members. Those properties come into play in many different areas and affect the reporting and what you see and whether you can understand those or not. Report header concepts, whether you want to add formulas to your report or not, and how does that work? Can I put multiple reports on one sheet? Can I create multiple reports from a template on multiple sheets or in multiple workbooks with one command, and many more things. So if you want to go further, these last 2 items, this last item I talked about creating multiple reports from a template, that's not in the one-day class. That has to do with report automation. So if you want to go further beyond basic reporting, you can take a one-day class on advanced spreadsheet reporting, which teaches you some Excel form controls and some very simple Essbase macro equivalent functions where you can do things like create buttons and so forth to automate your reporting. But there's also, to go beyond that, there's something called the Essbase Spreadsheet Toolkit, which is a 2-day class that allows you to automate your reporting in a similar way using Excel ActiveX controls along with the writing of VBA macros. Don't let that worry you. I've had people attend this class with no programming background whatsoever and exit successfully. And within those macros, we use Essbase functions. But really, to show you that, I'd like to show you that live here. Here's an example of 2 Essbase reports on one sheet. And I've got a button here, and I've got option buttons there, and a checkbox there, and a drop-down list there. And I'm going to do things like ask the user, what's your username and password? And after they enter that, they can use any one of these other controls to change the data. Notice the data in this report, 54, this report, 18.51. When I pressed actual, I've gone off via the use of a macro, and based upon their selection, retrieved new data into both of those reports. I switched it to budget, the data changes, variance, data changes, variance percent. Or here I say, do you want to see profit data or profit percentage data? So I'll uncheck it, and now I'm seeing profit percentage data. Check it again, now I'm seeing the profit data itself. And what state or region do you want to see this data from? I'll select Nevada here, and the data changes based on the selection I've made there. Very quick, and from the user's point of view, very simple. And that's part of what we learn in the two-day Essbase Spreadsheet Toolkit class. And there's also something like this, where you have created a template for your end users, and you want your end users to copy this template many times based upon the choices that they want that they make. Which markets do they want to see this template for? In which time period? And do you want it for the actual or the budget or the variance type reporting? So I created this template, but as far as the user is concerned, they're only concerned with this. They log in, supplying their username and password, and once they've done that, they press this Create Reports button, and within there they select as many reports as they want. Here I selected Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Oregon, and Utah. Select the time period, I'll say May here, and select a scenario, actual budget variance or variance percent. And when I press the Build button here, I'm going to get separate sheets within this workbook. If the user pressed this checkbox, they would be output to separate workbooks. But I'm going to keep them as separate sheets so you can watch them being populated down here. And when I press that, you see that now I have the Utah for May, and I thought I selected budget, and maybe I selected actual, and the Oregon for May, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And that's all done via the use of this thing called the Spreadsheet Toolkit, using Excel ActiveX controls, VBA, Excel VBA macros that within them contain Essbase functions which do things like connect to Essbase, retrieve from Essbase, disconnect from Essbase, change the options so that the options are set correctly so that the user doesn't have to change options, many things like that. And that's in our 2-day class. So create a template to be copied multiple times, automate the login process, automate the user selection, and copy those templates many times, as you just saw me do live there. So that's it for the webinar today. If you have more questions about the topic, feel free to chat with me or give me a call, chat with me online here, or give me a call at the phone number you see, or contact me via my email address that you see here. And I do want to stress to people that besides this Excel spreadsheet add-in, Oracle Hyperion Essbase now contains another tool that is very similar to the spreadsheet add-in called SmartView that you can use for reporting. And please attend the webinars on SmartView in the future, or just contact me if you have any questions or any interest in SmartView, and we can discuss that offline also. So that's about it for today. I don't see anybody raising their hand or having any chat or questions in the question area there. I kept on saying chat. I should have said questions area. So I'll leave it at that for now, and thank you for attending the webinar today.